Jon Strande joins us today to round out our panel. He currently is in the product leadership group. He's focused on the sales effectiveness products that we sell. His focus is around AI, and he's got a little bit of a personal passion around a topic that we're going to talk about today, around the humanistic elements of conversational interfaces. And we had an interesting talk about something very simple, like if you have a phone, an Apple phone, and you talk to it and you converse with it with Siri. One of the conversations we had, which was very interesting, is how many times do you say please and thank you to Siri? And how relevant is that? And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. He's spent a lot of time in his prior job at Hershey working in their advanced lab, working with conversational interfaces and how they interact with the retail and CPG practices. So very happy to have Jon with us today, and he's actually here local, so he's the one that didn't have to travel that far. But if you add them all up, there's a lot of air miles here. So Jon, thank you for joining us today. You're welcome.
Everybody knows that Twitter bot called Tay, and they just launched it into the free air and let people see what it's all about. And it started talking, and some pundits started to train it in all kinds of profanities. And at the end of the day, it was talking like it was part of, forgive me, of the Nazi regime. And everybody said, oh, they couldn't contain it, and it was a bad experience. They should have tested before. But I think it was amazingly successful because that machine was learning. True, it was learning the bad things, but it was able to produce some new stuff that nobody thought about. So, QED.
Right. What doesn't get talked about with that often enough is the Xiaoxi, the one that they did in China that was incredibly successful and didn't turn into like a fascist, racist, sort of, nasty bot, right?
Because they contained it, they limited it.
Absolutely.
But one of the...
Well, and it's cultural thing too, right? Because what Tay was sort of a mirror on the culture that it was sort of observing, right? So it was sort of picking up on what others were doing. You're right. It was learning. In China, the culture is a little different, right? And so there isn't so much. It's sort of sample size. What it was learning from, isn't sort of doesn't sort of go out and say things like that in public. That culture doesn't do it. So the chances of it learning that type of language, a little less. But you're absolutely right. The key there is the learning, right? And so what it learned from mattered. And just to build on that, Simon, I think it's a great point, right? And Todd and I were having this discussion sort of before the panel, and the comment that I made is that as you look at any technology as it matures, you have what's called the shovels and maps effect, right? It's sort of, Simon, you and I talked about this as well. So it's, regardless of what the technology is, there are people who come in and sort of provide, like in the gold rush, the people who provided the shovels and the maps to the people searching for gold. It's the same in the technology space, right? So what we're seeing right now is a maturation of the tools that are available for people, right? And so just like AWS can provision servers, I can go get Lex, the natural language service from Amazon, the same one that they use for Alexa, handles multi-turn conversations, and I just pay per usage, right, for every message that goes in and out. We will start to see more and more tools, shovels if you will, be available for stuff like that. Andrew mentioned at the beginning, right, technology is being democratized. Open source packages, you heard it 100 times on the first panel as well. The tools are maturing at an unbelievable pace.
Right. And I want to keep on it because I think you touched on something, and I just want to continue to push down this path. The humanistic element of this topic is really important in how we engage and how it grows. And I know, Jon, you've been kind of studying in this space, and we talked about the simple example earlier. If you interact with Siri, do you say please and thank you? That's the simplest. But do you have some points of views on this? Because I know that this is an area of your interest.
Yeah, I mean, and to our conversation, right? This is, I think one of the very first decisions that you have to make when doing something like this is the decision to humanize or not.
Right.
Right. So you go, Apple naming it Siri, Amazon naming it Alexa versus Google just calling it Assistant, right? And not giving it a human name. And then there's a company in New York called X.AI, and they have an assistant named Amy and Andrew. To schedule meetings for you, right? If I want to schedule some time with you. And there's like several videos online. You can find people from this company talking about it. But they start to talk about all of the sort of the 3 years that went into building this thing. And one of the stories that I absolutely loved was, when you think about the humanistic of it, right? Is you go, my expectations change when it's a person that I think I'm interacting with, right? That human type of conversation. And so one of the examples, let's say that you and I have a meeting for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., right, or 9 a.m., and I go out tonight and it gets a little late and it's 1:30 in the morning or whatever, and I go, oh crap, I need to push that meeting back, right? So I send you an email and I copy Amy, my assistant, right, and say, hey, can I push our meeting back tomorrow an hour, right? Now Amy, my assistant, sort of has to figure out that what I meant was today, not tomorrow, because cognitively a human thinks of today as today until the point we go to bed,
Yes.
right? Or tomorrow until the point we go to bed, right? So all of that sort of the way our interaction with whatever it is we're doing, whether it's HoloLens or any kind of this future interaction, that decision to humanize just becomes absolutely critical because the way I as a human will interact with it changes based on that.
Now the question then becomes, what additional capabilities are you bringing to bear to the consumer?
Yeah, sorry, really quickly. So there's a company in Silicon Valley named Fellow Robots, right? And so they got some press about a year ago with Lowe's, right? The Lowe's partnership. But it's a robot that actually like is embodied with some human elements, right? And it goes up and sort of greets you in the aisle and sort of, can I help you, right? What additional things? It takes you to, right, the thing you're looking for, just like a person would, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So I want to, it's a great point. I want to back up just a second though, because you said about technologies that we might not be aware of.
Passion.
And sort of kind of fuse two conversations together. So you said Cortana also opened an API. Well, Alexa, as Simon's played around with that in the API. One that I just started playing around with is the chat flow from Kit AI. So basically what it is it says, I'm going to write my logic, right, my business code to solve whatever problem, and it sort of abstracts that interfaces away from me, right? So now an endpoint can be Alexa, so I can accept requests from there, from Facebook Messenger, from Kik, from Telegram, from Slack, wherever, right? Even custom interfaces, like I can have an SMS code from Twilio or wherever, and my logic is sort of running in AWS somewhere, but now with sort of one service, I can now sort of service any of those devices, any of those services. And so you start to think about, oh, I can now start a conversation in Alexa and then pick it up in Telegram,
Oh, yeah.
right? Since you admitted you didn't play with that one, I'll admit I didn't play with the
Okay,
Microsoft
all right,
one.
fair enough.
I was just thinking it sounds like Microsoft Bot Framework, but
Done. It looks like Jon is very passionate about this one. Go ahead, Jon.
As a matter of fact, it's a great question. I didn't plant that one, but the answer is yes. Rick and I are chasing that, and he did a really good job articulating one very specific use case around the programmatic buying, right? So today we have a buyer at a retailer making a decision around a promotion to run, as an example, and there's all kinds of problems with that, how long it takes and all that kind of stuff. But as Rick pointed out, right, that ability to sort of be able to get that sort of analyst help, that agent help, that bot help to make that decision faster, better, is certainly something we're chasing.
So I want to.
So, and maybe I'll just take us up a quick level here. The title is The Future of Human-Computer Interaction, and I actually have a UX background right now. One of the things I used to love to say is the easiest interaction is one that doesn't have to take place.
Yeah.
Right? So I think if we start to think about this in those terms, and when we talk about the panel, at last year's CES, Samsung introduced that refrigerator that had the beautiful screen on it, right?
Right.
And everyone got all enamored. All the stories were about, oh, I can order groceries from my refrigerator. And what not enough people wrote about were the cameras that were inside the refrigerator, right? And so you go, as a panelist, I don't have to record anything. The cameras will just sort of, with image recognition, just sort of pick out what I put into my refrigerator. Quick side tangent here. Now imagine if there's a system that's running in your house that knows the inventory of the things that you have that can trigger the automatic replenishment, as Paul and Simon and I have spent time talking about, right? Just now all of a sudden that ability to sort of not make people record things is just like, that's really where I think it goes. And that's kind of, as we've adopted Agile here, it's about putting product in the market to get feedback. But the product manager for Google Now spoke, I can't remember what conference it was, videos online, beautifully about what you're talking about, right? forgive me, I'll use some language here. She called it the what the hell problem.
Hmm.
And it goes, if I'm the interface should sort of represent the confidence of the system, right? So if I ask you, if I ask the bot sort of, well, what time does Home Depot close tonight? And the bot comes back and says, oh, it closes at 10 p.m. And then I go at 9:15 and it actually closed at 9. What the hell, right? Like, I can't believe you did that to me. But if it's a much less sort of investment sort of question, right? Who's the Secretary of State? If I get that wrong, right? What's the real, what's really going to go wrong? What's really going to happen?
My daughter just submitted a paper.
Yeah,
recently.
yeah.
A lot of things that go wrong, right?
And so we talked earlier about context, right, and perspective, and you start to go, now all of a sudden, who decides what the hell moment is? The other example she gave, which I love, you're a traveler too, is the what time should I leave for the airport?
Yeah.
Right, traffic and so forth. So, yeah, the one other example from the Google lady is she talked about language translation, right, where the delta between sort of what I have without it, right? I can only speak one language. So when I go to Shanghai and I'm like stranded by myself versus even bad sort of translator, right? I'll take a beta product of Google Translate, right?
It's a good enough, and the enemy
Good enough.
of the good is the better. So why don't we launch good enough?
I guess the same one I gave to you, right? Magic. So GetMagic, GetMagic, getmagic.com. So you basically text a number and say, I want something, and they take care of it for you.
How long will it take me to get to the airport? And they will get back to you on it.
Or I want a 6-pack of beer and a pound of ground beef, and they'll arrange for Instacart to bring it to you.
Yes.